Hello and welcome to the Alley Report. Today we're talking to author and podcaster Armand Rosamilia, author of the Dirty Deed series, United States of the Apocalypse, High on Bigfoot, St. John's River Monster, and many, 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 many others. Thanks for coming on here today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. That's one thing is we kind of talked about just a little bit when we first got on here was about, you trying to have something new available every 6 weeks, like every 6 weeks or so. Um,
Yeah, that's
how?
that's that's the goal. Well, so I'm prolific. I write between 400,000 and 500,000 words a year, and I always have on my board. I have usually have like a dozen different projects that are open, which is great. Whether it's a monster book or horror book, I'm working through a second 6 book contract with Severed Press right now. So I'm
Nice.
working on the 10th, 11th, and 12th books for them. And then I also do a lot of crime thrillers that I self-publish, and I also co-write books. So I had a trilogy that came out with author Tom Duffy last year, or the beginning of this year, heist trilogy, and now we're working on another trilogy, like an action adventure one, to put out at the end of this year. So I always have a lot of different things on my plate, and I also write a lot of short stories. So that includes magazines or anthologies or different things. So I always try to have something out because of the algorithms for Amazon.
Yeah.
You don't want to get lost. And I've done it a couple of times in my career where I've just I'm just going to write for the next 6 months, and I'm going to put like 5 or 6 books. I'm going to try to finish these and then release them. In the meantime, then my sales have dipped because I'm not still out there doing it. So for me, it's being aware of and promoting. It's being aware that you have to have something out because people tend to forget about you quickly.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much. It's kind of like a golden age of indie horror and other genres. I've heard people say because there's just so much to choose from. So yeah, it really is easy to get forgotten. I mean, like just as someone just even listening to podcasts and things, there'll be some that are like, oh yeah, they took a while to update, and I forgot they existed until like a
Yeah,
year later.
exactly. Well, we're Netflix now. We're binge watching everything. You know what I mean? You don't ever sit down and go, like me and my wife over the last weekend, we watched that baby reindeer thing on Netflix. 7 episodes, like seven. We just sat and watched the whole thing. You don't like, let's watch an episode, you know, every day. It was like we're watching all 7 hours of
Yeah.
this all in one shot and getting it done. And that's the way a lot of people do, read books now. It's binging. Back in the day when in the 80s and the 90s, you had one book a year by every author. So that was kind of the way that they trained us. I knew every year was a new Dean Koontz book. Every year was a new whatever, and so you get used to that. Now people they say, oh, here's your first book in the series, and a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to wait until the series is over. And so a lot of times, like I'll do trilogies, or I do 6 book series, or Dirty Deeds was a 12 book series that I completed, and I make sure people know that the series is over. There's going to be more of these characters in future trilogies or 6 books, but they're done. So you can and once I hit that 12th book in Dirty Deeds, it was like double in the sales because now everybody's like, okay, this is done. I can binge 12 books here. I'm going to read through, and I think that's important too for authors. I mean, there are a lot of authors that just do standalone, especially in horror. They just will do standalones, which is great. But for the crime thriller stuff that I'm doing, you got to do a series. So I kind of adjust. All the stuff I'm doing with Severed Press is all just one and done, monster books. High on Bigfoot or St. John's River Monster. Any of those are just here's a monster. The monster's gonna kill some people, and we'll see what happens. And then you move on to the next one. And I think it's horror reader and crime thriller reader are different readers too when it
Yeah.
comes to one. Horror reader wants a shorter book, and they want just that one and done, and they want to get to the end and to that. Whereas crime thrillers want a longer book, and they also want 6 books. They want to read this character for you know, almost 400,000 words.
Yeah, my wife reads a lot of crime thrillers, and every series she picks up, it's like, well, there are 26 of these books, and I'm gonna read 18 of them this week. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
she burns through them. And yeah, with horror, I feel like yeah, they want one and done, but I think novellas have become so popular because it's a way horror authors can get more out. So it's like they'll want more of that author, not necessarily more of that story.
I think horror too. I think a novella is the perfect length for a horror book. I mean, there's a lot of authors that are writing horror. And again, so this is my 36th year being published and my 13th year being full-time able to live off of my writing. So I've been around the block a million times. And a lot of authors are doing like 100,000, 150,000 word horror books. And to me, as a reader and it's too much. Those books are too long. I love that 25,000, 30,000, maybe stretch to 40,000 word horror story. I want to read that. I love it. Love reading horror anthologies. I'm always
Yes.
reading one. I mean, I love that 5,000 word horror short story. I think that's a great length for a horror story. And so, again, it's what the readers are dictating. But like you said, they want to an author wants to be able to put out, that 12 books a year if they can. And what better way to do that than to write, the Severed Press stuff is all 30,000 word, novellas, which is
Right.
great. I mean, I'll pump those out pretty quick.
Do you think it helps that you write in different genres and different styles that like you can do that, make that many books, many stories, and you don't get burnt out because you can hop between the different genres and styles before one wears you down?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps that I work on multiple projects. Like I work on multiple projects in a given day. So I might get up in the morning and have start my coffee, and then I'll write a chapter in a crime thriller. I'll write 1,000 words or whatever, and then I write live on Twitch 3 or more days a week. So, those afternoons, I might jump into, okay, I'm gonna write more on this horror book, and then that night I might, after dinner I might say to my wife, hey, I'm gonna write a little bit more, and I don't know what I'm gonna work on. So I might work on 2 or 3 different projects each day, and I'm a total pantser. So there's no notes, there's no outline, nothing. It's just what I'm feeling. I'm making lunch or I'm taking a shower or I'm going out to get the mail, and it's whatever ideas are in my head at that point. That's the most important ones. Unless I have a deadline that, hey, I have to get this done, and then I'll super focus for
Yeah.
about a week on that. But that gets kind of boring just staying in that one world all the time. I mean, I have to have multiple projects.
Yeah, 'cause I see even people where you have an author who has like a main series and that's their thing, that's their bread and butter. They'll have little offshoots and little like side characters will get their own story because I guess yeah, if you're
Right.
stuck in the same world for a while, you have to get out.
I never understand authors who write they're just doing that one series and they're only writing in that world, and they're not even doing side characters. They're doing, here's I'm going to write 2 or 3 books a year of just this in just this world with these characters. To me that would really bore me. I
Yeah.
don't know if I would be able to handle that.
Um and working like I've never co-authored a book with anyone before. That seems kind of daunting to me. But you've done that with two series or
And that would have a bunch of different authors. So the United States of Apocalypse is a apocalyptic that I co-wrote 3 books with Mark Tufo. I've done the Johnny Bell Heist trilogy with Tom Duffy. I wrote 5 books with the late great Jay Wilburn. I've written the Shocker trilogy, funny horror trilogy with Frank Edler. I've written Keepor Cthulhu with Chuck Buda. I've written a couple of zombie books with Tim Baker. So yeah, I've written with a lot of different authors over the last, say, dozen years or so. But they're authors that I like their work. They're authors that I read. They're authors that I know their style is similar to mine. And I've had a couple of times where I've worked with authors and I knew I was pushing it a little bit, that maybe they weren't, they weren't really my style. I consider myself more of like a pulp fiction writer. I just want to tell a good story. I don't need to use giant big words. I don't need to use, purple prose and all that. I just want to tell a good story to keep the reader involved. And a couple of times I've gotten away from that with working with other authors, and it didn't work out. The books were never finished or released.
Yeah, I could see that being a challenge, especially like as you get deep into the project. Also, it's like, oh man, this is not working.
No, because and again, I'm a pantser, so if I work with somebody who's an outliner, I don't want to sit and I don't want to talk the outline out, because then I've already told the story. Then
Yeah,
I don't want to fill in the blanks on it. The story is already done. That's boring for me. Um, you get to the point, like I had one author that I wrote with, and they went completely. We're like halfway through a book, and all of a sudden they have this crazy maniacal sex scene for no reason. And I'm like, we're no, this isn't, we're not even using profanity in this book so far. And then you have this really crazy torture scene. It made no sense within the book. And we basically couldn't come to an agreement, and we walked away. And on one hand, it's like, well, I wasted a lot of words, but then I didn't, because then I cannibalized parts of what have written for other things in the future. So
that's good. Yeah,
yeah.
you able to get something out of it.
Nothing is lost at this point. Anything I write, if there's I see an anthology coming out and there's a pretty cool theme, and I'll write a short story for that. And if it gets rejected, either it becomes a longer thing, or every year on my birthday in November, I put out a short story collection of 21 stories. And they're new stories, they're older stories, they're stories that have been published, they're stories that have not. And the idea for me is, because I have couple hundred short stories, and they're all over the place in different places, and some of them have been out of print for 10 or 15 years or longer. I want to get all of that into one collection, so at some point I'll have, I don't know, 15 or 20 volumes of these short stories.
That's amazing, especially like the keeping them in print, like keeping them vanishing into the ether. Um,
Right.
and
Because for me, there's some really good stories there. I just wrote
yeah,
a couple of short stories for anthologies, and one of them, they canceled the anthology because they didn't get enough submissions. And the other one, I loved the story, and they were just like, we can only take 12 stories, and like literally you were like the 13th story. Which is great for the ego, but it's not good, because I wanted to get into that. But then I know, hey, I got this good story that it will see the light of day, either this year or next year, whatever, when I put them in one of those collections.
yeah, I've had a few where I barely didn't make the cut. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
but then like I said, a short story collection, or there's been a handful of times where I've written a story so specific to a call it almost wouldn't stand on its own in a short story collection. Where
Yeah.
it's like, ah, well, I guess that one might have been a waste, but
Yeah. Well, even those though, because I do an author note in the beginning or the end of the story in my short story collection. So I'll say this one was written for, the legendary Max Booth, when he did the pizza anthology a few years ago. Everybody's got a pizza short story that they've written. So, like, to tell that story is fun as well, to say, hey, I wrote it for this very specific thing. And I just wrote a short story that got rejected, uh, a cosmic horror thing, and it was a Thomas Ligotti-esque story. And I love
fantastic.
his work, and I love this story. It's probably one of my favorite stories I've ever written. And they rejected it. They said nice things about it, but they still rejected it. But I'm like, well, this is definitely going to be something that, it's it's a little too specific to look for another call for
Yeah,
it, but it's still good to put in the short story collection, and hopefully then somebody will enjoy the story.
yeah. I the whole pizza thing, I missed all that. Like I wasn't on Twitter as a writer, and at some point when he was doing calls for short stories, I had a horror story set in a pizza place and sent it to him. And then he had a thing on Twitter about don't send me any more pizza stories. And like I got the backstory on it, and I was like, that was
Yeah.
me. I'm sorry.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah, those pizza stories were like every anthology that was coming out, somebody was sending them pizza stories, which I thought was hysterical.
If I win the lottery, I'm gonna have him do another call for pizza stories and be like, tell him it's 25 cents a word. We're gonna flood the market again. Like that's how I would spend
Yeah.
my money.
Yeah. That would be funny.
Um, and and also like I'm very new to the podcasting interviewing, but you've been doing it for a while and very successfully. Being
I stopped doing it. I did 400 episodes of
oh
Armcast
shit.
podcast, which is all interviews with authors, sometimes two authors every episode every week. Then I did 333 episodes of Armcast podcast with me and co-host Chuck Buda, and we basically talked about writing. We talked about what was working and what wasn't working for us. I also did a 24 episodes of Armand Tooth with me and Mark Tufo years ago. And then I also did a baseball one. I was a co-host with two other guys, and I think I did about 20 episodes of that. So I've been doing podcasts for like 14, 15 years. But about 2 years ago, I for me, I realized what's the return on investment on all the different things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And the podcast stuff started to feel like work. It started to feel because most people go think, oh, you hit record and you're going to have a conversation with somebody, and then you're gonna shuffle that easily onto a Libsyn or whatever. And the reality is, there's all the editing. There's setting up the interviews. There's carving out the time. I mean, all these other things that you go through as a podcaster, and that our episode is probably 6 hours of your life that you've just wasted. For me, it was like I could be writing now. I
Yeah.
could be using this time for other things. So I think maybe at one point I might go back to it, or whatever the next thing is. I've been playing with a lot of putting a lot of stuff on a YouTube now. So I put all my Twitch as so at 1 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll go on Twitch and I'll write live for like an hour, and there's a chat room, and people are in there talking to me and everything, and I'm writing just a random whatever I'm writing. And then I'll drop that to YouTube later on in the afternoon, and then people will watch it back then as well. And then I do a 5 minute thing called walk and talk, where a viewer will ask me a question. Could be about writing, could be about food, could be about the cats, it could be about anything. And so I'm filming those once a week as well, and just trying to get content out there that I can do. That's reusing stuff, moving stuff. The walk and talks go on my Patreon, so I'm writing chapters. Some of the chapters I'm writing on Twitch end up on the Patreon. So I try to look at everything and say, where can I use this two or three, different times? Nothing's going to get wasted. And the podcast stuff started to feel like I was wasting that time doing it. I loved interviewing people, but also got to that point where I was starting to interview the same people over and over,
Yeah.
or I was starting to not really feel some of the interviews. I was starting to get people that were throwing themselves at me to do interviews, and I was like, some of them, I was like, I'm not even a fan of their work, and I don't know why I'm not a fan of theirs
Yeah. But then
sometimes.
all of a sudden you're dropping 3, 4 hours, 6 hours of your time
Yeah,
that you could be
yeah.
writing or doing stuff on
To talk to
Twitch.
somebody that I'm not familiar with, and afterwards I'm like, I'm not interested in, and which I guess is a crappy thing to say, but it's the truth. And so it got to the point where I had interviewed all my heroes at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I talked to all the people. I didn't want to sit down with Stephen King. I didn't want to sit down with Dean Koontz or James Patterson or anything like that. But I wanted to get, especially in the beginning, was all horror authors. So you get to that place where you've interviewed everybody. And then you also get to that place where you're interviewing people, and then they've done really dumb things in the future.
Yeah.
and they've and especially now with cancel culture and everything. So now people are saying, "Well, you interviewed this person 2 years ago. Okay, well, what do you want me to do?" He wasn't saying homophobic things in the interview 2 years ago. I didn't know this person was this awful person now. So you really start to question like every single person you're talking to. You
Yeah.
really have to do that due diligence of, okay, this person wants to come on my podcast, but is this person, do we have any red flags here? Do we have any issues? Because you get caught up in that as well, which is not good.
Yeah. And I've seen that happen where someone gets exposed and all of a sudden everybody's scrambling of like, well, did I sell them a cover? Did I give a blurb to their book?
Right.
Are they in an anthology I did? Like it just
Yeah.
starts this ripple effect of,
Yeah.
you know,
Have I interviewed them on a podcast?
yeah.
And they people love, right or wrong, people love that anonymity online of I can say and do whatever I want and I can attack everybody and nobody can do anything about it. And it's good exposing the bad characters, the bad actors in all of this. And the horror community has a lot of them,
Yeah.
but it's like every 10 days there's a brand new thing. Somebody gets excited and I say, well, just wait. Just
Yeah.
it's like Florida weather, wait 5 minutes, it changes. And
Yeah.
that's what
It'd
it
be
is. And
someone new. Like,
as we're talking here, we've had this in the last 10 days. We've had a couple
yeah.
of big kerfuffles. And it's, what are you going to do? Because I know in another week there's going to be another idiot saying something stupid, or just doing something that's dumb, and then we're all going to attack this part. We're going to move on and move on. So it's never going to end.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Just and it always seems to, especially people that are like might want to make themselves the voice of the community. I feel like that's always like the second somebody's like, I speak for the community, it's like, oh, what horrible things have you done? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, you get that. There was one person who a couple of years ago was the, voice of the community, not really in the community all that long, and they were very vocal and they were very, uh, you know, uh, pointing out all the bad, all the evil, blah blah blah. And then about 6 months ago, that person was called out for all of the bad things that they had done.
yeah,
So it's like you're shouting over everybody, but in the meantime, you're doing the same thing that these people are doing, and in
yeah,
some cases, you're doing worse than what they're doing. So I try to keep my head down. I try not to talk politics, try not to talk religion, try not to talk anything too personal. And I also try to, I'm 54 years old and I'm happily married and I got kids, and I don't want to do or say anything that's stupid. I don't want to do or say anything that, my mother would be embarrassed about. And I
yeah,
and I think people forget that, and people forget that, especially with the last couple things we've had. There's no such thing as privacy anymore.
yeah,
There's no such thing as, well, I just had this conversation privately with this person. No, you didn't. You probably had that conversation with that person who obviously shared something with their friends and their friends and their friends, and everybody in the community knows exactly what's going on.
yeah.
So it's
That's
it's not fun.
yeah. I've always operated on the thing of like never DM something that you wouldn't want public. Like
Right.
if this is instantly on Twitter, Facebook, what have you, for the world to see, would you be okay with it?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Because
and that line between
most people now are not gonna, if you have a beef with somebody, if you have something back and forth with somebody, unfortunately, which is the time we live in, you can send them a message and say, go F yourself. I don't believe what you believe, or whatever. And they're not never gonna go, oh, okay. Oh, this is between you and me. They're gonna go, oh, okay. This is what this jerk just said to me. And then 500 people are gonna attack you on top of that, not knowing everything that happens. Because on a lot of these things, I look and I go like, well, I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand some of this is also your fault,
yeah,
because there's no such thing as privacy on any of these matters. Whenever you send a direct message or anything like that, that stays there. Anytime you tweet something out, even if you delete it, somebody's already captured that
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah, the
you know?
Wayback Machine will uncover your
Yeah.
sins.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does.
Um, well, like you talked about, being cognizant of what you say online, and also, you just stay relevant and to stay, up to date with your audience. You have, Patreon, Twitch, things like that. Do you find it hard, like trying to divide out like how much of yourself you reveal to your fans and your readers and your followers online, and how much is like that you keep to yourself or keep personal?
I so my what we've been together for like 12 years. We're married for 9 years. And when she started going to book signings and events with me, she's very surprised because I'm actually very introverted. I'm very quiet, and I'll leave the house once every week or two. She'll drag me to dinner or something. And so when we go to these events, she says, "You're no longer Armand, you're now Mondo. You're this character, talking to people, kissing babies, shaking hands, that kind
Yeah,
of thing." I'm out in front of the table. I go to AuthorCon. I used to go to Scares the Care. I go to a lot of different events and big book signings. And I'm out there and I'm talking to people and I'm doing all that. And then we get back to the room and I'm exhausted. And the ride home, I'm exhausted. Like I don't talk. When we leave Virginia, it's like a 12-hour ride back here to Florida. I hardly talk that day because I'm just mentally drained because of all that. So
yeah,
I'm aware that there's the public me and the private me. If you are actually friends with me, if you grew up with me, or actually you'll know a lot of stuff about me, and I it's nothing is fake, but it's just more pronounced. It's more out there, So um, I like barely drink, but I have over 100 different bottles of bourbon. I love collecting. I'm more of a collector of bourbon
yeah.
than anything else, and but I'll go to a convention and people will bring me bottles of bourbon. People will bring me one convention. I think it was a Scares of Care. I got 19 pounds of M&Ms from people because everybody knows I love M&Ms, and so it's the the positive, the fun things like that I try to put out there. Instead of the negative or any of the other stuff. I'm very open about I have depression. I have therapy every week. I am a moody old man who will scream, "Get off my lawn," that kind of thing. But I when I'm out there, I'm still trying to have fun because I'm still a fan. I'm still, I go to conventions and I still can't wait to meet certain people. I still can't wait to meet authors that I grew up on, authors that I'm reading now that I'm really a big fan of. I'm going to BoucherCon in September, and it's like one of the biggest thriller conventions. And there are so many authors that go to these. You know, Jeffrey Deaver and Brad Thor and all these huge authors are always there, just standing in the bar having a drink. And I'm excited and I'm scared at the same time to be in that company. I've met everybody pretty much in the horror community at this point. And I used to get excited about some of them, and now they're actually just my friends. They're people that I can pick up the phone and call and have a conversation or ask them a question about something. Which is really neat. I look at me 40 years ago reading some of this stuff, and there's no way I thought I would make a living doing this, but there's also no way I thought that I would have peers or people that are doing better than me and whatnot. And I'm friendly with them, and I can pick up the phone and call somebody and just ask them a question, and they're going to answer the phone and know who it is.
Yeah, that literally dream come true.
Yeah,
Um, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. I appreciate it.
yeah.
It's been
Appreciate you,
awesome.
but yeah. I
And
I watched some of your other episodes. When people started mentioning it, I was like, "Oh, let me check this guy out and see what you're doing." So it was very cool when you invited me on.
yeah, happy to. And yeah, I like to think I'm getting a little better at this. Like I'm figuring it out as I go along. Um, well, everybody watching, if you haven't read anything Armand's written, you should. There is so much out there. There's series, some
Yeah.
of them are done. You can jump right in. And yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll
Thanks for having
hit
me on, man. Appreciate it.
absolutely.